Hi everybody. When we're doing this work of co-creating our lives that we know are aligned with our true soul purpose, something can often come up, and that is our own thoughts. And they can be often very self-defeating and negative. I like to call these the thoughts of the negative ego self, or the inner critic. In fact, we have many inner critics. And I personally was introduced to this concept a few years ago by my own coach, and did an exercise, or several of them actually, that helped me uncover this voice and what it was saying to me. It's often these deeply rooted subconscious beliefs, or false stories, I like to say, that we carry with us in our heads for years almost, sometimes for our whole lives, and we don't even realize they're there. So identifying them, learning to be aware of them when they're coming up, and then separating from them is so important in this process of aligning and of ascending and of raising our personal vibrations, right? So I'd like to talk a little bit about what exactly is that ego self and the difference between that and the higher self, or our soul. So let's back up a little bit and look at these. So what is our higher self to start with? Let's start with the positive, right? It is our soul in that higher realm, and it is really who we truly are, our inner self. It knows what we're meant to be doing in our lives. It knows what we're here to do. It wants us to grow. It wants us to self-actualize. It wants us to evolve. Versus the ego self, which is our identity, which makes us separate from people, our consciousness, and it wants to keep us safe. It does not want us to evolve. In fact, it's terrified of anything that pushes us out of our comfort zones. And this ego self is not all bad. In fact, it comes from this place of, like when we're kids, we are told not to run into traffic or talk to strangers, and those are things that are meant to keep us safe, and so that it really has its purpose. But what happens with the ego self is that usually in childhood, between the ages of 5 and 10 usually, we get told things, or we experience things, sometimes traumatic things, and it fuels this negative aspect of our ego self. And it becomes this subconscious story, like, I can't afford that, or I'm not good enough, or, like we hear, you're a mistake, or you were an accident, or you shouldn't eat so much, or, nobody likes you. It can be really mean things that other kids can say to us, that unfortunately sometimes even parents say to us. Even the quote best of parents can inadvertently create some really damaging subconscious limiting beliefs just by statements that they make offhand that can stay with a child for the rest of their lives. So the goal in this work is to really learn to differentiate between what is that voice in our head that is of the higher self, our soul, and what is that of the ego self, which is not really who we are. So let's dive a little bit more into what these two parts of us are. So our higher self is our right brain. It's the intuitive side of us. It is based on feelings, on creativity, on impressions. It's very vague. It's not, it's not linear. Versus the ego self, right, which is the left brain, rational, logical. The ego self also likes to be very melodramatic, and so something might be actually rooted in a little bit of reality, like you can't afford that, which can come from a belief that we were taught as children. And maybe that's partially true in a sense, but it often believes 100% of the time that you can never afford anything, and creates this deficit mentality. Money, which is a very big block for many people, including me at many times in my life. So learning to just recognize these thoughts that we're having and saying, well, is that 100% true all of the time, that I can never afford anything, or that I'll never make money as an artist in life, or people will think I'm weird if I start talking about intuitive things. Everyone will think I'm weird. No, it's not true 100% of the time. And so there's things that we can do to kind of talk to that ego voice and calm it down. The sound of the ego voice is a lot of kind of whiny, and it goes on and like analyzes things a lot, and it can go in circles and spin around and around an issue, versus the higher self, which talks in short phrases. It's kind and gentle, soft voice. It's our intuition, right? Even our higher guidance. And it's usually short things like email your mother, or reach out to that person, or get a new job, or whatever it is. They're short phrases, and the ego will be like, come up right away and be like, no, 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 you can't get a new job because then you won't be able to have your house, and then you might lose all your friends, and then you might be homeless and penniless and, be a horrible loser, right? Harsh things like that is what we actually hear in our head. So some people sometimes ask, well, how do I then get in touch with that intuitive side or that higher self? Well, there's many things we can do that. One is to simply start practicing meditation. That is literally rewiring our brains. When we let go of our thoughts, we're also letting go of the attachment to those thoughts. And we're beginning to develop this ability to notice the thoughts that we're having. The more that we do that, then we're able to notice those negative thoughts that are like, oh, that's part of my ego or part of my inner critic. I'll use those terms interchangeably. Other things you can do are just do something creative or in your body, painting or dance or just exploring outside in the woods. These are all wonderful activities that your soul longs to do. I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm just trying something out. I am not committing to anything. This is what we can tell our ego self. I'm not committing to anything. Just calm down. I'm just checking this out. So there are things we can do to kind of calm that ego self that is constantly looking for the worst in everything, right? It's always looking for something that's a threat, and it goes into that fight or flight mode, which is that trigger reaction when we feel like we're threatened. We can then also get in touch with that higher self. Just ask ourselves, well, if you're making a decision about something, how does this make me feel in my heart? Does this feel right for me? And usually it's the first thing that comes up. It's not, the long drawn out analysis that the ego self loves to do, loves to analyze things. In fact, it overanalyzes things. It's the first instinct. And so it's kind of developing that awareness of what's my initial reaction, and then often right after that's when the ego comes in. Some other ways to deal with the ego self, because it can be very devious, and when we're pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones, when I work with people in coaching, we're making a lot of change, and then there comes this point when it's just when you're on the brink of doing something really courageous, it can start to freak out and come up with all kinds of reasons. It's very judgmental, it's harsh, it wants to figure things out, which doesn't work so well for those of us trying to explore what's our sole purpose in our career, right? Because we want to see, like, all right, what's my experience, what's my resume? That's the ego's way. And it was what we were taught in public schools and in many workplaces, to think in this rational, logical, structured way. We were never taught to, in most cases at least, to just trust our feelings and our intuition. So connecting with, working with that ego self, we can say, let's see, when I'm trying to make a decision about something and I have this feeling about something, is this based on a subconscious fear? That's a great question to ask ourselves, because usually there is some kind of fear underneath it. And if we're telling myself, well, I really want to, ask that person out, or I really want to, email somebody I know who's really does some work in an area that I find fascinating, and maybe they have a job for me. But then our ego is like, no, 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 you don't really like them anyway. You don't have time. You're too busy. Oh, wait a second, those are fears. There's some fear here, fear of rejection, fear of failure. So we can kind of do this work in our mind to see where the fears actually lie.